I'm so excited that you get to join me today. It's always so fun when we get to chat, and I love these firesides because
Absolutely.
we get to go all the way through your career. These are very informal. There's no hard Q&A. There's no sort of specific format. We usually start at the beginning of your career, and I'll talk you through it. I may slow you down or speed you up through various
All good.
sections. But I'm looking forward to it. And, you should be a pro at this because you are a noted interviewer of behavioral scientists, right? How's it feel to be on the other side of the mic for once? I feel like.
I'm not sure yet. I'll let you know at the end.
All right, fair enough. Fair enough. Well, I wrote a book called Start at the End. I want to know now how
Mm.
you're gonna feel later, right? Isn't that how that works?
Yeah, but I
Uh,
tend to always skip to the end of a book anyway. I'm one of those terrible people, so it's not going to do you any good.
I after the book came out, there were people who wrote me and said, I flipped to the last page just to see if you like had done a thing. And then I kicked myself. I was like, that would have been so good. I'm just not that
Hmm.
funny. I'm not witty enough to make it
No,
happen. So
I'm sure you are. I'm sure you are.
take us all the way back in time. Like, you have one of the things I love about you is you have a really diverse educational background. You have a lot of different
Thank you.
experiences. And so I want to sort of talk about the journey. I know that like economics was prominent early on. Like
Sure.
you pretty early in your educational career, you decided that like economics was a thing for you. What's behind that? Did you like read a child, my first economics book and suddenly you
Oh
decided
my
this is a
God.
thing? Like,
No, no, not at all. It's actually economics for me showed up in my undergrad, but before that, I took it in high school as well. And that's mainly because, and from a behavioral scientific perspective or a developmental psychology perspective, this is so uninteresting. It's because my dad's an economist. It couldn't be much lamer. But so this is the thing. So in high school, and in the Netherlands, or at least in my case, high school was like 11 to 17. And initially, I didn't want to do economics because my dad was an economist and I was going through my rebellious phase. But then I also realized quite early on in high school that I wasn't really good at anything else. So, by elimination, there was not much left you could do. Like, I was pretty decent with numbers. My languages are pretty good, but like, I don't understand physics. I don't understand chemistry, or potentially I've only ever had terrible teachers, could be, but I was good at math, and a lot of economics, at least in high school, is just pure math. So can do that, take that profile together. So I come out of high school knowing essentially my languages and economics. That's all I've got.
eh,
However, what I wanted to do was psychology.
but so wait, so you knew then that like psychology was something you have this economics background, you have this language background, but psychology is something you want that early on.
Yeah, I did. I think this became really quite clear to me, I think, when I was halfway through high school, so around the age of 14, 15. Psychology was always it for me because I find people fascinating. I think that may have also come from the fact that it took me forever to learn how to properly understand people. Took me a while to get along with people. But once you get there, it can be a great experience. But it took me a while to understand people. I've always had a really strong fascination for clinical psychology, which is obviously very different from what I do now. But I thought psychology was absolutely fascinating. Now the issue is when I started like going to like open days for university and learning about how psychology was taught, I hated it. And this was so earth-shattering to me that I was like, I can't possibly put myself through this kind of education because I know, and it sounds incredibly arrogant, but it's not meant that way, but I know I'm going to get bored. Like the way this is taught, I don't like it. I don't want to sit in endless lectures where people talk to me, or rather talk at me and 200 or 300 others about what's going on. And then you go home and you do your readings, and then it's rinse and repeat. That to me is not, and it's a very privileged perspective, but that to me is not a really great way of doing education. So loving the topic, slowly coming to terms with the fact that economics is now nailed itself into my background, and mainly trying to figure out a way to go through higher education or tertiary education, if you will, in a format that suits me rather than a topic that suits me. Which is something I still recommend to people. If the topic is amazing but the format doesn't fit, it's still going to be a problem. Whereas you can get really hooked into any kind of topic as long as the format fits your learning style. And it's something that sticks with me still, and it's advice I still give. Also, when it comes to how people want to approach PhD, that the topic matters a lot less than the why and the how and the who you're doing it with and the kind of support that you can get.
Yeah,
Anyway.
I definitely felt that in college, and like you, still recommend it today. You know, I could have Barry Schwartz could have taught anything he wanted, right? I happened to learn psychology from him, but he could have been a history teacher, and I still think I would have learned from him, right? And so, you know, if I look at my own educational career, you know, particularly undergrad, you know, by year 2, I'm pretty much just taking, you know, 5 or 6 professors, right? And it doesn't really matter what they teach that semester. I'm just going to take whatever they teach that semester because they get to me. And as someone who has a teaching degree, when I went and taught, for example, in middle school, there were kids, you know, they just couldn't learn from me. However I taught as a person just didn't show up for them in the right way. So you're at, you know, Maastricht when this is sort of happening, like, are you gravitating towards a particular set of teachers and that's how you're sort of managed? Because you did double major in economics and psychology there, even though you said, hey, I don't like the way they teach psych. Like, you know, how did that sort of play out?
So realistically, so when I was actively seeking out a method of teaching, what became popular in the Netherlands, where I'm from, is I think we call them university colleges in the Netherlands, but I think in America and the UK, for example, they're known as liberal arts degrees. Right. So what they look like in the Netherlands is it's kind of like choose your own adventure in terms of topics and what's going on. And like you kind of have to stick together through a variety of courses that you yourself have picked a degree. Now, I'm not saying that doesn't come without its pitfalls. You do have to be somewhat strategic about this, and you can't just piss away your time in higher education and taking an introductory course to everything and then having a degree made up of introductory courses. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that. But for me, the thing that very happily surprised me was when they explained what this program was. First of all, I love a choose your own adventure. I don't, the types of economics I don't want to do, I don't want to do. The types of psychology that I don't think is relevant to me, I don't want to study. Again, I'm very arrogant in this regard, but I made these choices knowing that I can push myself 3 or 4 years of a degree I really don't want, I really don't like, to then continue into a career I probably also don't want and don't like. It doesn't make sense, especially not for the opportunity cost that is associated with education, especially in the UK and the US, because I'm also partially UK educated. So I was like, okay, I can do this. I can, you know, pick and choose and then make this fit and be somewhat strategically savvy about it. But much more interesting is that you had very few contact hours. So whereas some people were spending 20 hours or worse in lectures, UCM, so University College Maastricht, which is where I was at, they had 12 or 14 contact hours at best, and maybe 2 hours of that per week was lecture. The rest was seminar, discussion group, problem-based learning. So you showed up to a tutorial, which was going to be, you know, seminar 2 hours long. You had a problem statement up front. They had sorted out the readings for you. There was mandatory, optional, and there was things you could further figure out if the topic made absolutely no sense to you, which is perfectly fine. And then you, in a group of probably a maximum of 12 people, discuss what was going on. It was still very structured. Like you had your problem statements, you had a group lead, that, you know, discussion leader, if you will, you had a note taker. At the end of it, everyone had to be across all the answers to the problem statements. And these can go, you know, from as like what is roles in theory, if you were doing political philosophy, for example, all the way to what are the most probable causes of like catatonic schizophrenia if you were doing clinical psychology, things like this. And that works because I think most people, you know, who have met me probably have realized quite early on, I love to talk and I ramble a lot, but I love to talk because I like to be engaged in discussions. I don't care if they're verbal or written, doesn't matter to me, but like I like these types of interactions. And this works very well. Where someone tells me this is the problem, you have 1-2 days to read everything you can on it. Take that back, answer the questions, the problem statements that we set you up with, come back, discuss, almost as a robustness check, as an expansion of your knowledge, making sure that you have understood what others have understood, get your different viewpoints and perspectives, and close down this chapter. And then realistically, from those notes, you could write your assignments, you could do your exams and whatever. We had actually very few exams. It was mainly paper writing and presentation, which I think, quite frankly, is a much better preparation for the future than any exam is ever going to be. So I love my undergrad. I thought it was amazing.
And were you getting a chance to get in the lab and do experimentation at this point, or is that something that came sort of later for you?
For me, that came a lot later. I think during this entire undergrad, which was 3 years, so this was like 17 to 20 for me. I think we ran a single experiment. A lot of it was very theory heavy.
Got it. Well, but you're in the Netherlands, which has produced a number of really interesting behavioral scientists. I always sort of say, if I look at, I've never formally tallied this, but I think it's probably true that outside of the United States, I've probably given more behavioral science talks in the Netherlands than anywhere else. It does seem it seems very like sort of germane to the Dutch approach that like this sort of like applied behavioral science thing. We're also, there's a difference in age between us. So this is 2013, 2016, right? Like applied behavioral science is becoming more of a thing. This idea of psychology and education was sort of radical and weird when I was in undergrad is sort of being more accepted. Yeah. Did you feel like your professors, the approaches were sort of complementary? Did you feel like a lot of tension, like how did that sort of like psych and economics interplay come about?
So that's because I chose the courses that way. So I'm not entirely sure my economics teachers and my psychology teachers ever met, quite frankly. So it's just, I mean, it's very much like you've got your course manual. It has all the courses in them, who teaches it, what's going to get taught, and which terms you can take them. Obviously, there's different levels to these courses. So you've got 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 level courses, and you probably can't take a 3,000 level course willy-nilly. You do need to require prerequisites. For example, you can't take complex human cognition without without having at least 2,000 levels in 2 psychology classes. That makes perfect sense. Choose your own adventure, but with the basic skill sets to be able to survive the adventure. That would be nice. Thriving instead of surviving. So that's very much how that was set up. And in my first year I did psychology and stats almost exclusively. So I just rammed my way through all the 1,000, 2,000 level courses there. Statistics, it wasn't mandatory at my undergrad, but I think every mentor told their mentee, yeah, you're gonna have to do this. It is without question that you need these in your degree. Don't resist, just accept it. Which is just good life advice. You can't do anything these days with statistics, at least not really on behavioral science. It's very difficult. Second year was economics, econometrics, and game theory. I still have a very fond love for game theory. And then my third year was merging it. So that was complex cognition, neuroeconomics, economic psychology, and this type of stuff. And obviously the dissertation, which I had the best dissertation supervisor for that. I was very happy with him because he was also my economic psychologist teacher, and he was a neuroeconomist by training. And he ultimately told me, just go to the UK. The Netherlands isn't really ready in terms of behavioral economics programs. Yes, just go to the UK. And I was like, okay, thanks, I'll apply.
Yeah, so let's drill in there. Did you know, I mean, you have really spent your career as an applied behavioral scientist. Did you know all the way back in undergrad, hey, this is going to be an applied track for me? Or did you think, hey, I'm on this academic, I'm going to be a professor, this is kind of what I'm doing?
I mean, realistically, I'll tell you something worse, which is going to show you how happy-go-lucky some of my decisions have been. But I didn't know when I finished up or was in the process of finishing up my undergrad what behavioral economics was. Like, I had done psychology, I had done economics, but the term behavioral economics or behavioral science meant nothing to me. I think I came across it once by accident when I had already applied to the program and was therefore, more open to, I mean, this is vocal bias, right? You're more open to it, so now you can spot it. But like, I finally found the Freakonomics book in like the church bookstore in Maastricht. I think it used to be called Selexis. I'm not sure what it's currently called. And it was Freakonomics. I was like, oh, that looks interesting. So I bought that, and I'm not even sure. I mean, no hate to the excellent authors and podcasters of Freakonomics, but I'm not sure I've actually completely ever read it. How's that for a thing to admit? So I had to be told by both my interim dean, who was a philosopher, and my thesis supervisor, who was a neuroeconomist, and hey, you should probably go to the UK given the profile that you've got. Here's a couple of schools that do really well in the field of behavioral economics. They then had to explain to me what behavioral economics was. They're like, it's just a merger of economics and psychology. You're already doing it. I'm like, okay, great, thanks. And I applied willy-nilly. And at the time, so this was the end of 2015, 2016, the highest ranking program was Warwick. And it's still a program I absolutely recommend because I have great respect for the teachers there. I love the courses they taught. I love how they taught them. And yeah, off I went.
So you had this idea that you were going into academia. You had some nice convergent validity, which is you independently figured out that behavioral economics was a thing by studying behavior and then economics, and then being like, and then other people were like, you're right, that is a thing, right? Yeah. And so you still think you're on this academic track, and you didn't break. I mean, you went right from undergrad, which I know was 3 years for you, right into a master's program. What made that decision about going right into a master's rather than, taking some time?
Again, this is going to display truly like how faultless I can be. But in the Netherlands, because of how the country's education system is structured, and I'm going to get into the details here because it's a lecture in and of itself. But in the Netherlands, once you've done an undergrad, because you're now already so academic, the chances that you can actually get a job with just an undergrad are not particularly good. So to further specialize and to further solidify yourself in your craft, in your topic, in your field, you will do a master's. There isn't a lot of people who take a break in between, and I think that's just something very cultural to the Dutch. So the idea of coming out of a liberal arts program, which it is surprisingly difficult to do a master's degree with a Dutch liberal arts program, even if it's still in the Netherlands. That's the problem I hope that by this stage they have figured out. But it's much easier to get a degree that way in the UK because the UK doesn't have these very stringent requirements for like, if you have an undergrad in law, you must only do a master's in law. They're like, no, you can get into a master's in law with a variety of degrees. Actually, law is a terrible example for that, but you know how I'm going with it.
I do.
So getting into the UK with having a profile that says, well, I've done psychology, I've done economics, they were like, yeah, that seems a good fit. The only thing that took convincing, which I still find which is absolutely hilarious to this day, is that I took fast lane English in high school, which means we had like 6 to 8 hours of English a week. There's a reason the Dutch are so good at English. And then my entire undergrad was in English. Like there was not a Dutch word spoken between the students there, which makes sense because half of them were international anyway. And then for Warwick, they were like, well, you're from the Netherlands. Do you have any proof that you speak English? And I was like, oh, wow. Great. That's
You're like,
still a very
try
cool
to get
memory.
me to shut up in English. Let's just have a conversation and then we'll go.
But so that actually ended up happening because I was like, listen, I'm not going to spend the money on an IELTS or TOEFL or whatever they're called, especially not because I was made aware of this requirement way too close to me actually having to move to the UK. And I was like, can you just call me? Like, I can prove to you that I speak English. Like, just call me. And it was a 5-minute call. They were like, yeah, you seem fine. Checked off. Have a nice one. See you in 2 months. I'm like, thanks.
That's awesome. And so you come to Warwick, right? You move over to the UK, you come to Warwick.
Yeah.
You love this program. Tell me a little bit about, I know ironically, I know a bunch of people who've come out of the Warwick program, but I don't know a ton about it, as opposed to like maybe the UPenn or LSE program. What was the master's like for you? Like, how did it sort of look? The master's is formally the Behavioral and Economic Science master's. It's got a U in it, which makes it inherently inferior to those of us who don't believe in the U. Tell me about the program a little bit.
Well, ironically, your obsession with the U sounds more like a you problem, if you don't mind the pun.
It does sound like a you problem.
It does. No, I absolutely loved it. So I think the teachers there, they were also very diverse in their own backgrounds. Some of them were trained psychologists. Some of them were trained economists, either experimental or neo-traditional. Both were fine. And they had such a wealth, such a plethora of different experience, and they had very interesting paths into the field as well. And as you already mentioned, I'm an interviewer myself. I've been able to interview actually most of my teachers on that program, which I really, really enjoyed, because it's nice to then have a slightly more mature relationship with your teacher. Like they first they were your teacher, and now they're like, welcome to the field, it's you and your colleague. And I'm like, much appreciated, much appreciated. And it was just a great transition of a relationship, I guess, if that's the way you want to describe it. But it's just a great program. I think it's just, they made sure that it was a really good blend of choice modeling, the mathematics underlaying it, the theory underlaying it, but also what this would look like in practice. And there was a very strong focus on research, because that makes sense. The way the master's was designed, they did have a very strong drive to get people into PhD programs, which is why it was so research focused. And it was really driven on, this is how you write an academic paper. This is how you write a proper report. This is how you have to understand these models. And this is how you can recognize that this kind of methodology isn't sound, or that this kind of statistics, this kind of method, this kind of analytics is not sound, and how you can do much better yourself. And personally, I think that as much as I love theory, as much as I love going through endless conceptual debates, the real thing that you need to be able to figure out in behavioral science is if what you're looking at is methodologically and statistically sound. It's the best way to move the field forward and just get rid of the dead weight and the fraud and the p hacking and God knows what other nonsense. It's the only way the field can move forward at the rates that we're going currently.
And so I love that. So the program is sort of giving you this academic rigor. Do you still think you're going to go become an academic? Like at this point, are you like still on the path of like, I'm going to be, where does the inkling that maybe you might want to go outside into industry, because you're coming up to another major inflection point, which is graduating from this program and then going to WBIT, right? So I want to talk about that program, but like, are you aware at this point that like you might want to exit the academic track, or is that still later?
No. This is way later. So the thing here is, and you need so much context for me to be able to somewhat cohesively explain what's going on there. So when I came to Warwick, keep in mind, I am at the start of the program, I think I just turned 21. Like, I'm a rookie. Like, in hindsight, I'm sure I thought that I was the shit. Like, I thought I was going to nail it. I knew exactly what I was doing, check me out, having just moved to another country as an early 20-something. Not hundreds or thousands of other people do the exact same thing, but I thought I knew what was going on. 3 weeks later, like just 3 weeks into any kind of master's or any kind of program at Warwick, the career fair starts. Warwick is very, very intertwined with industry. They want to make sure that they can place their undergrads, their masters, their postgrads, whatever, in like internships, grad programs, and move them on to having very lucrative careers if they so desire, of course. So there's a lot of Big Four, Big Five, Big Ten. I don't know how many consultancies there are these days. Too many, if you ask me, at least of that caliber. And I do the same thing as everyone else does. Like, I don't know what's going on. I'm looking around me. I'm like, well, all the sheep are moving to the right. I guess we'll go to the right. And, Meh is my middle name, I guess. Like, I didn't know what I was doing. So like being a sheep was better than, being anything else at the time. So I followed suit. So I did the applications and the training centers and the interviews and et cetera, et cetera. And like, as I was progressing through, I hated it more and more. And it just really wasn't a fit for me. I didn't like the questions asked. I didn't like the structure of how these interviews were done. I was like, this is what you need to know of me as a person. Like the next round, I was genuinely convinced they were gonna like make me take a Myers-Briggs test. I was like, I'm out. Like, I don't know. We're not doing this. And the people that were interviewing me, I didn't think I would gel with particularly well. So I'd done it for quite a few consultancies. And I was like, I actually got some offers. I was quite pleased with that. So like, at least I can hack the system. But I was like, I don't want this. But by this stage, like our master's program started in October, end of November. I'm like, I've got no idea what I want to do with my life after this program. And I've got less than a year to figure it out. To me, because I'm surprisingly organized, or at least very future oriented, this gave me a massive fright. So then I did a week of faux soul searching. It led to absolutely nothing. But one of my professors could tell that I wasn't really doing well, and they were like, "Yeah, are you all right?" And I was like, because I was essentially crying over one of my R assignments. So like we learned to code and analyze data in one of my in our studio. And I was just like, I just don't know what to do with my life, and I don't want to go into consulting. I had a full meltdown, and like I still have to appreciate the fact that the man didn't even blink. It clearly he had done this before, for better or for worse. And yeah, I just told him, like, listen, like how it went, that I didn't want to do this. I didn't know what to do. And he was like, well, what is it that you like doing? And I was like, well, I like this. I like analyzing data. I like studying people. I like talking to people, and I want to make them better at dealing with their biases. He's like, do you have a specific domain you're keen on? I was like, yeah, how they manage their money. Because I myself was atrocious at the time with managing money. Every paycheck I earned immediately reinvested in shoes. So it's not good. Not good at all. My present bias is very strong, which is why all my planning is super future oriented. Just like I have to balance myself out somehow. So I was interested in that, both for myself, trying to fix myself, and then hopefully through those learnings, maybe be able to help others. And he was like, well, that sounds interesting. We do work in that regard. If it's research that you're keen on, maybe you should consider doing a PhD. And as I said, happy-go-lucky, stubborn, head first. I was like, you're right. I'll look into that. It's like, get back to me next week if you find anything interesting or if you have any further questions. I came up with a research program in that week. I was like, this is what I want to study. Where do you think it'd be a good fit? He's like, you know what? We're actually looking to do something similar. I'll take you on as a PhD student. I'm like, great,
Okay, then.
solo, done. Yeah, well, it's not that deep, is it?
No, I think it's super deep and super fascinating. Uh, it, I want to double click for a second. I want to take you back a little bit. So
Mhm.
you had this instinct, you talked to the big consultancies and you had this instinct, hey, these aren't really my people.
Mm.
Tell me a little bit about that. Like, what made you go, hey, maybe this, like, what about them rubbed you differently than some of your more academic colleagues?
Well, in hindsight, this is highly ironic, and I know a lot more consultants of smaller boutique as well as the big players now. Um, and I also know a lot more academics. So I generally have the feeling that the consultants I got exposed to were just, and to no personal insult to them, but I'm just really not the best pick of the bunch. I thought they were incredibly arrogant. I didn't think they were friendly. They weren't remotely interested in the process. It was very automated. It was very much, I'm pushing through this. There was no real human element to it. Especially the younger they were, the more arrogant. I think a couple of the older and more senior people I interviewed with, I perceived them as nicer, but really that could have also just meant they were better at the game because they'd been at it longer. And it's just I wasn't super keen on the process. And when they outlined the kind of projects that you'd be working on, and I still hold this opinion to this day, but I don't understand really how someone fresh out of an undergrad or a postgrad is an early 20 something with no experience in a kind of industry is going to step to a client who may have 5, 10, 20, 30, God knows how many years of experience in the industry, and is going to come to them and be like, oh, you've got a problem? Don't worry, I will fix that for you. It is a mindset I cannot get into, where I'm like, how is this 20-something-year-old going to tell someone, yeah, maybe like a potential industry title or just someone with experience, whereas they don't have any experience of that industry or with that company at all, how to run it? And it's just I maybe the entire business model of these grad programs is a bit foreign to me. And that's not to say that these grads are not smart people. That's not to say their methods don't work. It's just something I struggle with to align. And maybe that's just because I value expertise a lot. and expertise to me looks different.
But
But that might be a me problem.
no, I think it's so I want to double click on that though, because at the same time you're doing a PhD, you're also, helping guide the work behavioral insights team, which, in its own right is sort of consultative,
Oh
right?
no, not at all, not at all. I
In
think you're
nature.
hyping this up. No, I think you're hyping this up much bigger than it is. So, like the Warwick Behavioral Insights team, keep in mind this is not affiliated with the actual bit. This is a student-led
100%.
organization where younger people, so people in psychology, economics, like, or sustainability degrees, depending on the topic that we were working on, got research experience because we stepped in the university. We were like, listen, we are able to do experimentation and help you design things and change, problems if you like. But keep in mind, we are a bunch of students, but we would like to do it. And if you would like to give us the resources and then support us a bit, we would like to support you. And a couple of people actually did this for their undergrad dissertations or their master's dissertations because the university was very supportive. They were like, yeah, it would be great if you could redesign certain aspects of the campus on a very small scale, by the way, or if you run surveys and find out what it is that students are lacking or what their concerns are about. So we did things with regards to like mental health and like sustainability, because I mean they are huge topics on a student campus. But like let's not pretend here that we're consulting with the vice dean of Warwick. Like, come on.
For sure, but you're still, I mean, you're lending what you do know into the world. Where is that what sort of pushed you towards like maybe not academic? Like I'm still waiting for the like where is the world that suddenly decides that like maybe academia isn't on the thing? Because so far you're still on the like, hey, like this is the thing that I'm doing and I'm doing this thing.
Yeah, that's yeah. My PhD was 4 years, and I think I really enjoyed the first year. Still had a lot of structure to it. You do a couple courses. I was able to run some experimental research up front, and then in the second and third year, most of it was data analytics. And at the time, data analytics was not my strong suit. It's a proper developed skill with me now, thank God. But I was struggling through that, and at the time, it also became clear that my main supervisor was incredibly busy. And I don't want to say that he didn't have phases in which he was very supportive, and he did help me out a lot. I don't want to discredit that. But throughout, it became clear that this man had so much on his plate, and meetings with him could be double booked, triple booked,
Ooh.
rescheduled without notice. And then sometimes you did go significant chunks of time without any support or any feedback or any real interaction. And when and my second supervisor was a bit better in this regard, but both of them weren't particularly open to criticisms or concerns or feedback. And that may be a part of the British system. I mean, obviously in Dutch, I don't know how if the crowd here knows Hofstede's dimensions particularly well, but in Dutch or in the Netherlands, and Dutch hierarchical system is flat. That's not to say you can walk up to your boss 3 times removed and call him a twat. I wouldn't recommend it, but it does mean that most people are open for feedback, and just because you're a more junior member doesn't mean you don't get hurt. Other cultures are a lot less open to this, as their hierarchical systems are more steep. I'm still struggling with this as a Dutch person, because it's something you have to unlearn if you work outside the Netherlands. So the experience in my PhD, as a result of this, I don't think my supervisors and I were the best fit for each other, did largely limit the enjoyment I had during the PhD process. I still have a lot of respect for most academics. I think the trajectory they have to go through is really quite intense and grueling, especially the younger generations now. I love reading academic papers. I still enjoy writing academic papers. I haven't stopped writing academic papers or trying to publish them. Obviously, scientific rigor is something I hold in the highest regard, which is also still something we, my team and I do in the 9 to 5. So that has never left. But for me, I see the PhD that I've done as a great way of learning how to be an independent researcher, and to deal with all different kinds of levels of setbacks and hardships, and I don't know, just to toughen up and produce some sound scientific output.
Uh, is this a gradual decline? You're sort of realizing this as you go through your PhD and you're enjoying it less and less, or was there a moment where you were sort of like, nope, it went off the cliff and I'm not doing this academic thing and I'm not doing this?
I I think there were two specific moments which quite frankly can only be described as, to me, they were absolutely horrific. It took me a long time to get over them properly. They were both interactions with my main supervisor that, I mean, they left me rattled for a while, to say the least. It was interesting. One of them was actually during the pandemic, so it was a 90-minute long Teams call that I don't think I'll forget anytime soon. But it was just like, and it's, again, I've had one or a couple bad experiences, as I did with the consultancy, that I just write off the field. I'm a bit, I think I'm a bit too black and white in that regard. Something to work on for sure. But I think at the time it was like, well, if this is what academia is going to be like, because for a postdoc you still have supervisors or more senior collaborators, and then throughout, you do need to work, or it's a good idea to work with more senior people and advance your career like that. And I was like, I just cannot do this currently. It's mentally there wasn't that much left of me, if I'm being very honest. And I had a friend from the masters, also at work, as we discussed, that went into the financial services as a behavioral scientist. I stayed in contact with her. I still am in contact with her. I have a lot of respect for her as I also like her as a person. I have a lot of respect for her as a person and how she went through her career trajectory, because it's very different from how I did it. Hers was much more organized, much more strategic, much more purposeful, some would call it. And yeah, it's just she seemed to really enjoy her work. And obviously, I have an interest in the financial services because I have an interest in how people manage their money. Surprise. So what ended up happening is that I very thankfully, through her, got introduced to that team, and had data. I was able to get data from this financial institution to test one of my hypotheses. So I had a collaborative relationship with them. And as a result of the pandemic, my friend Etiosa told me that she was moving back to New York. She wanted to be back in the States, which is where her family is based. I think for a lot of people during the pandemic, that became quite a clear thing. And for a lot of expats, they were like, yeah, this might not be the thing for much longer, which is of course a perfectly acceptable choice. So we essentially switched around. So her job became available, and I applied to it. I'm currently in a completely different job, by the way, from the one she had, but in the same team, so that works out. And yes, through that I applied. The team already had a working relationship with me, and as soon as the country, so Australia, where I'm at now, opened up again after the pandemic, I was on the first flight over, as I'd been hired, and I could start. And I was very keen to see what this would be like in corporate.
So you know me, I'm going to bring you back a little bit. You
Of
keep
course.
going forward. I'm going to bring you back a little bit. I'm reminded a little bit of your reaction to academia in some way almost sounds like Zoe Ziani, who was the grad student that sort of first uncovered or objected to some of Francesca Gino's papers, right?
Mm,
And was met with such suspicion and sort of had these experiences that were very dismissive because of this notion in academia that is very hierarchical. Oh, you're a junior researcher, and what do you know? And you got to
mhm.
go along to get along, and you got to publish with these big name people, or you won't have a reputation. And she left academia too, I think, in
Yeah.
response to some of these sorts of things. So you have these moments, you sort of figure out, all right, it's not going to be academia.
Mhm.
Uh, and then, you have these experiences that tell you that it might be applied. Like, is there do you remember the first time you sort of felt like, hey, there's this other path and I might go walk this path and what this might look like for you?
I mean, that was mainly because I had friends from the masters who didn't go into a PhD and who continue, the much more applied trajectory, who were like, yeah, a master's is enough. I want to actually apply this to the world, which I mean is what I'm doing now. So I completely understand the sentiment. So that is essentially it. I think it was just looking around and seeing what other people did, other people who I knew and who I understood their skill set, I understood their background, I understood their motivations, and it was like, yeah, that aligns with where I'm currently at. I think at the time, because I started my PhD when I was still 21. And I think in hindsight that's very young. And by this stage, like knowing what you want for the rest of your life, I mean, quite frankly, I mean, I might have thought at the time that I knew exactly what was going on, but in hindsight, I still don't know what's going on. And I'm significantly older now. So like, let's call a spade a spade. But
Dude, I'm
yeah,
41 and I still don't know what's going on, man. Applied behavioral science
okay.
keeps changing around me.
True, very
Every day
true.
is a little bit different. So I hear you on that.
Very true.
Were you reaching out and having conversations with them about their experiences, or you were more looking at their LinkedIn and going, "Oh, what are people up to?" Like, how does this sort of like manifest for you?
So I still had a contact with a lot of them, like in addition to the master's program being absolutely great in terms of teachers and teaching. I think it was also just a really good cohort. I still have a lot of love and respect for all the people in there. I stay in frequent touch with quite a few of them, and I'm always happy to see how they are tracking, whether that's in academia or outside of academia. But I think, and this is something that, especially because the PhD in behavioral science that I did was at a business school, and a business school has a notorious high dropout, and I don't mean people, quit halfway through the PhD, but as in these people don't progress into academia. And I think some of the reasons for why this is have been fixed, because one of the reasons was like I was in a cohort of like 35 PhD students, but at the end of our 4 years, like they're only going to give like 5 people like a position at the business school that we were at, and the other 30 have to figure it out. But like if every university does that, you can understand how overflooded the market is. So this is not a workable protocol for particularly long. So I think we always had the expectation a significant chunk of us wouldn't go into academia, and a lot of people actually start a PhD knowing that and were being completely fine with it. So that's, to me, it's a really interesting one. I think they have changed that. They now hire a lot as PhD students, at least the Warwick Business School specifically. But this continues to be a problem at quite a lot of institutions. But I don't know. I didn't start with the idea like, oh no, I'm going to, definitely not stay in academia. For me that was kind of the default path, and clearly that default did not happen. But I think it's so no, it's talking to the people I already knew from the master, seeing how they were tracking, but it was also talking to the people in my cohort, one of them being Lara specifically, who again I'm still in contact with, and I really always enjoy talking to. But she also went into the financial services. It's just her PhD was half a year shorter than mine, different funding programs, different requirements, the whole rigmarole. So she finished half a year earlier. So she also went to the financial services. And, we obviously kept in touch as we are friends. And I was just like, every so often it's like, how are you tracking? How do you like it? Like, what's going on? So she moved to London, so I continued. I saw her in London quite a few times. And I was just like, how are things going? How does it compare? Et cetera, et cetera. And so I got a much better idea of what life after the PhD could be like. And I like the way it sounded. And Lara to me is a very good and honest and truthful source of information, as she is German. And we had the same PhD supervisor. So like we knew where each other was at. We were very transparent of each other, and she's also always been very supportive. So she would have told me, she was like, listen, I'm having the greatest time, but like this is not a fit for you. Like you wouldn't hack in a single day. If she had told me that, I would have probably listened to it. But she didn't tell me that. She said, like, I think it will be a good fit for you as well. So yeah, I looked into that, and here we are.
That transparency is so key, right? Because
Mm,
there's a lot of pressure, to put a big smiley face on applied behavioral science, right? Because you don't want to say anything negative about it, right? Because then you're
Sure.
hurting the field and then you're doing the thing. That transparency
Yeah.
among people, that clearness about like, hey, this isn't the right thing for you and maybe you should be looking at something else, or no, this really is the right thing, and let's draw you in. Did you consider things other than financial services? Was there a like, maybe I'll go into health, maybe no, you were like, FinServ, like this is my thing.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, my entire PhD was on how people perceive and handle different kinds of payment methods, which is niche, I'll admit. But I love this from a survey experimental data perspective. I still love this. I am up to date with any of that literature. Doesn't matter if it's sociological, business literature, psychology, economics, pure finance, neuroeconomics. There's been a couple of really good, interesting papers in that domain. I love it. I'm still up to date with it. I'll never let it go. But I don't, as much as I recognize the value of behavioral science in like a plethora of different topics, AI, tech, scams, just health is a very good one. For me, it's consumer finance or bust. Like as a core topic, I love it. Obviously, there's more than just consumer finance topics in the financial services. The aforementioned are actually also very, very important. But I love it. I absolutely love it. Because
I
money
hear
is such
that.
an interesting resource. Like money is like we've got so many resources and incredibly scarce resources. Health is a scarce resource. Time is a very scarce resource. And all of that gets treated so differently from money. And we've put such an emphasis on money for very understandable reasons. But it's just very interesting how people reason about it. Like I don't think there's a girl math equivalent for time. I think it only exists for money.
So the financial services institution that you go to has had a team,
I
right?
know.
So for a lot of
Yes.
people, you end up in this place
Hmm.
where you have to struggle to communicate this. Whereas, with the institution that you ended up being with in FinServ, they were practiced and had an understanding of this. Tell me a little
Yeah,
bit about
absolutely.
that. Like, what was it like to land in an environment where people, knew what this was, were speaking the language, right? How was that transition for you? Were there things was it culture shock coming out of academia? Like, tell me a little bit about sort of moving into industry at the institution you sort of ended up at.
I think the culture shock might have been more that I was now on the other side of the world. I think this culture shocks to me they're much more prominent in terms of actual culture. But industry, I mean, obviously there's a period that you need to settle, but like industry moves at a high pace, and I like it, and that is for a variety of reasons. To me it's very interesting to bless you to interact with the bless you again. It's that season, isn't it? Um, it's a very high pace, and you've got a varied set of stakeholders, and you need to figure out how that works and how that fits budgets and timeframes, and if the problem they are looking at is actually the problem that you think is going on. And that's not to discredit anyone, but I've had quite a few stakeholders who come to you with a problem. They're like, this is the thing that's going wrong, please fix it. But realistically, the thing that's going wrong happens three decision points earlier, and this is only a symptom. And I like the challenge of having that discussion of like, listen, what you've told me, I think, is not a complete picture. If you have the budget and the timeline available, let's move backwards. Let's take a couple steps back and start, messing around in a scientific way, of course, with a much more key decision point. And I've been very happily surprised with how open people are to that, even if they don't have any real understanding or knowledge of behavioral science. I think in the institution that I'm at, they've been very open to it, and it's been a very welcome surprise, because you obviously you read the horror stories of people who get into behavioral science units, and most of their company wants absolutely nothing to do with them, and they don't see the value. But the lucky thing is, I think in the specific team that I'm currently at, this team has existed for I think over 7 years. So the foundational or the foundational work, or just the foundation in general, has been laid down, and thank God it turns out to be solid.
Yeah, absolutely. Uh, I you all can go to LinkedIn and look where she actually works, which has a wonderful team. And I'm never, apparently I'm not allowed to talk. We can't end though. I'm cognizant we're down to 5 minutes, which I have so much more to talk to you about. We can't end without
That's
sort of
fun.
talking about money on the mind as well, right?
Sure.
Like, because at the same time you're sort of going through this academic track and doing this very academic thing, you're doing a lot of writing, right? Which
Yeah.
is, not every behavioral scientist wants to be as out there as you are, right? And it's morphed
Sure.
over time, right? You start with a place where you're doing more sort of, of your own writing, and then now you have a very, very successful interview series, right? Where you've talked to, Neil and a bunch of other really great people over time.
Yeah.
What's the genesis here? Like, where did you start writing outside of because when you're in an academic program, there's a lot of pressure if you're going to write to write for the academic stuff that you have to write for.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about like sort of how money on the mind comes about, and then I also want to talk about that inflection point where you really start focusing on talking to behavioral scientists. So let's start with the like, where did the genesis, like why did you start writing? How'd that come about?
So I start most of my projects from moments of hopelessness, fear, and frustration. Most of my things are motivated almost entirely by negative emotions. What's called cathartic, I suppose. But I was very disappointed with how much writing you actually did in the PhD. So I started the blog, I think, at the end of the first year in the PhD, because realistically, it wasn't writing, it wasn't information dissemination, it was writing, editing, more feedback, editing. No one is reading this. This has no value. Well, I mean, obviously, the person editing you is reading this, hopefully. But it doesn't land anywhere. This is going to take forever. I think I had my first study done before and completely written up by the end of the first year of my PhD. But like, I mean, it's currently exists on SSRM, but the publication trajectory is also just horrific. So like this information isn't landing anywhere, and I find that just such a massive waste. Because this is obviously not the point of scientific advancement, is to end up in a drawer somewhere, or to
Right.
go through to to take 7 years to get out into the world. It's just, yeah, I mean, I've got thoughts about this. Let's not dive into those. But so I was disappointed with the lack of writing and the lack of any kind of scientific advancement getting to people. And I'm sure most people are super aware of this as well, but the average journal article isn't actually that easy to access. And even when you can access it, it isn't that easy to digest. So we're stuck in this endless loop of hopefully eventually the work sees the light of day, but for most people, they still won't see it. I don't like this. I don't like this at all. This is not the kind of democratization of scientific advancement I had hoped for. You okay there, Matt?
Yeah, I'm good. Merle
Oh,
and I are
buddy.
passing each other. She's on the upswing, and we had to cancel and reschedule because you were on the upswing of being sick, and I'm going the other
Mm.
direction.
Oh,
Um,
buddy.
no, I totally hear that, right? I mean, I have published papers that came out 20
Mm.
years after I collected the data, right? I mean, and long after I've left academia, and still papers are
Exactly.
coming out based on things that I did as an undergrad. I mean, the
Exactly.
cycle is just so crazy. At
Honestly.
what and look, we'll put the URL in, right? It's Money on the Mind, folks, right?
Mhm.
Moneyonthemind.org, right? This is a very important site. You got to go
Yeah.
look, tons of, years of great content. At some point, you really start interviewing people. So these days,
Yeah.
you do far more interviews than you do other things. What sort of
Yeah.
starts to clue you in that what we really need to do is have a conversation? And they're not all applied people, right? Some of them are more
No,
traditional
no.
academics, right? It's a
Mhm.
broad range of people. But where does talking to people start to come into this journey and narrative for you?
So I've already mentioned my friend Etiosa, so she gets a mention again. She's been a great motivator for me throughout. She really has. But so she was now in Australia working in the financial services. I was still in the UK, having started my PhD. And we were going a bit back and forth that, despite these moves, and despite the fact that we thought we would have such a massive exposure to both these theoretical and now applied worlds and these people, that we were a bit underwhelmed with how much exposure we really had, and we felt that we weren't learning from other people's experiences quickly enough. And then, so we were a bit younger. Some of them, I mean, she's absolutely not shy. Like, she already reached out to God knows many behavioral scientists to even figure out that she wanted to do behavioral science. But I was like, well, we can't just like rock up to, like, I don't know, an academic with an H index of 140 or whatever it may be, and then just go like, hey, I'd love to talk to you. Can you give me some career advice? Or, this is not ideal. But most people do love to talk about themselves, which is why this series is so very successful, I'm sure, Matt. And to give advice in that format. So we scripted a set of questions, like how did you get into behavioral science? What are you proud of? What are you looking forward to? Advice that you would give to rookies. And then, of course, the ultimate question, who have you been inspired by? So who would you recommend us to interview, and just keep snowballing further? Now, because Etiosa was in the applied field, she started with applied behavioral scientists. I started with academics. And then I think we both published 6 of those, and I just loved it. I loved it so much. It just gave me such interesting perspectives on how you could get into the field and what people have managed to make out of themselves in this field, and how they went about that, and the advice that they would give. And I mean, for me, this was a treasure trove. So I kept doing it. I think now I'm like, I don't know, 210 interviews. So, like, I've gotten plenty of perspectives, including yours. And I love it. I absolutely love it. It's such a wealth of information, and it really gets you a much better idea of where the field is at from different angles.
All right. And so I want to end on the lightning
Hmm.
round of turning the mic back on you. So who or what got you into behavioral science? I think we got to cover that one,
Yeah, we covered
right?
that.
Accomplishments we can't talk about because we can't talk about your employer, right? Your interview format is very hard with your particular career.
It is.
So, but I did like the question, if you weren't a behavioral scientist, what would you be doing? So what would you be doing if not this? Because it really has been your
Yeah,
whole
yeah, it
academic,
has.
it really has been this whole thing for you. If not this, then what?
I mean, keep in mind, as I've already described it, like, a lot of me entering behavioral science was just a series of flukes and having talked to a single person at the right time. So you tell me at which decision node this could have gone wrong, which could have been any of them. And it's entirely possible I would have ended up in doing a regular psychology degree, hating it, dropping out, and then having to try to figure it out from there. I mean, I honestly can't really tell you what would have happened. I personally, and this is very depressing, I generally don't think I would have done well if I hadn't found behavioral science. I generally don't. I generally believe that. So I don't know.
I love it.
I
Island
generally don't know.
behavioral science, the island of misfit toys, right? We don't really work anywhere else but on this island. So I think this one is not embargoed, right? How do you apply behavioral science in your personal life, right? I can't talk about your
Yeah.
employer, but we can talk about your personal life.
No, you can
Are
talk
you one
absolutely.
of these? I mean, are you? You already mentioned that you're doing long-term planning because you're a terrible present bias person, right? Is this,
Mhm.
do you think of your personal life through this lens?
I think of most of how I plan my time and how I plan my finances through this lens, because these are the main things that I lose the present bias. So my entire financial system is mental accounting galore. Like, I've got buckets set up, I've got everything automated. It works very well, and it needs no manual intervention, and I won't give it any manual intervention because it's downhill from there. So it's just a lot of automation and a lot of temptation bundling, which is a good way of dealing with present bias. So, oh, I only go to the gym with people I want to go to the gym to, but I'm also only allowed to eat really, really, really unhealthy food on social events, stuff like this. That works quite well. So automation and temptation bundling,
And
that
temptation bundling.
works.
I'm with you on temptation bundling. I'm sort of
Yeah.
those. I'll eat healthy at home, but man, I'll have nachos with you. Uh,
Sounds good.
we talked a lot about skills. I think, we've talked a lot about skills and recommendations and how
Mm,
where you thought things were important for you.
yeah.
What about the prediction thing? You love to ask this, in the
I
next 10 years, where
do.
will behavioral science be? What do you think, right? 10 years, 10 years of behavioral science, what's next?
I think most answers that I've gotten to that and maybe just again, I'm very present biased. So 10 years to me seems like a ridiculous long time that will feel incredibly short. But I think most of the answers that I've gotten to it, I think are overestimating how much we are going to change. There's things I'm hoping for, but I'm not sure I'm going to see them given the powers that be and the systems that we have in place, as I'm very much aware of systematic influence. Um, but like I think, there have been massive developments in data science and AI. They will play a role. I'm not sure how far that pendulum is going to swing. I think people are overestimating how far that pendulum is likely going to swing, especially because I don't think the average person is remotely interested in this. I think we are interested in this. I think a lot of people that work in financial services, health services, fintech, health tech, they have very keen interest in this. Sure, behavioral scientists, if they're aligned with those fields, yeah, I can see why they're interested in that. And behavioral scientists tend to have a very wide remit of interest to begin with. The average person, I don't see it. And I think sometimes, and this worries me a bit, is that as scientists, whether theoretical or applied, that we sometimes move a bit too far away from the average person. And we lose that perspective very quickly. And it makes for a disconnected field. And I see this also with the kinds of arguments that we have. It's like, originally it was the irrationality debate, solid. Now it's are the nudges are effective debate, solid. The next one that's gonna come up is like, is behavioral science, like, should it disappear, and should everyone, like, should every HR person and strategist and CEO and whatever have a strong founding in behavioral science, or should this always be kept separate as its own unit of experts that can, as a resource that can be plugged in? Honestly, I don't know. I still think, it's interesting to debate irrationality or rationality. I don't think it's useful, but I think it's interesting. I still think nudges can have a lot of value if you apply them correctly and you really understand who you're applying this to. So now we're looking at data-driven and heavily personalized nudges. I still think that can work. Where behavioral science will be in terms of organizations, I'm not too sure, but realistically, if we can't consistently and properly prove our value and play nice with our cousins in HCD and UX, then maybe we don't have a right to exist.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. In prep for this interview, I read the interview you did with me in 2021, right? So it's been, and ironically, it has been, like almost exactly, you did it in May, and so it's almost exactly,
Yeah.
2.5 years. And you asked me the question, and I sort of said, well, like in the same way that data science has become more democratized, right? The average person now knows more about data than they used to and can evaluate information differently. I certainly said that was my hope. And so it remains to be seen. I got 8 more years. We're going to find out what's happened. And now we need our final question, right? You have interviewed far more people than we've had a chance to interview. And we do really focus on just the applied folks, right?
Sure.
But we've had a lot of overlap. I can't, most of the people we've interviewed, you've interviewed at some point, Amy Bucher and other folks.
Yeah.
Who is the person that we should go through their journey with them in the kind of depth and detail that we do, right? Who should I have on the show that you think has an interesting perspective on how people become applied behavioral scientists?
I guess realistically, I'll pose the question back to you. What kind of angle do you think you're still missing?
It's interesting to me. Every time I do this, I feel like I learn something new and hear about different people's stories, in part because people are going through these journeys at different times, right?
Sure.
And so there are a few things I think I hear over and over. We're starting to be able to do some pattern matching. There is a little bit of the misfit toy thing, right? There is a little bit of the, where people have that sudden that realization that may be applied thing. I do think across a lot of people, one of the things I feel like I've consistently heard is that the hierarchical nature of academia and the long lag time between sort of research and application was a strong inhibiting pressure for people continuing in academia. Now that might be because, I tend to hang out with people who might be marginalized in one way or another, and academia is not particularly great at dealing with marginalized people, right? We
No.
don't, right? Like it's still an incredibly sexist place. It's still an incredibly racist place, right? And so it might be a selection bias problem, but I'm interested, uh, I think everyone is an interesting brick in the wall. So I love the diversity of sources, right?
Okay.
So for example, one of the things I really loved about this interview is I think you're probably the first person who we're talking through where behavioral science, maybe Jesse Jeffsky as well, where behavioral science was a thing, right? When you were
That,
going through, right?
yeah.
As opposed to like, Amy and I,
Yeah.
those weren't,
Very fair.
the age difference is just such that it didn't exist when we're in innocence or anything. So I love that. But who would you love to read an interview by or see an interview with that you haven't got? Who's your dream interview for Money on the Mind? Who haven't you got on there that you want to get on there?
I mean, I haven't got some of the superstars on there, and I completely understand why they don't want to do it. It's a combination of, I mean, obviously, like I would love to interview Kahneman, obviously, but I mean, the man's very busy, so fair enough. There's other people I want to interview, but that's just because I think they've done a lot of damage to the field, and I am not an interviewer that pulls punches. So, which is why I know they don't want to do it, and I respect that. I think it's cowardly, but I can respect it. But realistically, if I think I'm with all due respect to anyone who significantly contributed to behavioral science, obviously, I'm interested in what the younger generation has to say. Like you said, it looks very different if you've gone through a behavioral science degree and you were like, I've gone through this degree and now I want to work for BIT or any of the big units in financial services or any of the big units in insurance or health. Like if you had it as such a clear goal. So I personally think people like that would make for very interesting interviewees because it's such a different journey and one that obviously, because of like you said, the age difference, the generational difference, we haven't seen much. So one of my favorite people to talk to, but he is a friend of mine, so it's probably a very biased suggestion is Pete Judo Di Haccio, who actually has a YouTube channel on behavioral science, which now is going to transition into critiquing scientific conduct in academia because he just got so fed up and with with the nonsense currently going on in behavioral science, which is not by any means limited to behavioral science. You see this in a lot of academic areas. And there's plenty of misconduct anywhere in the world, but scientific misconduct is a beast to tackle. So he's pivoting his YouTube channel almost as a response to his love for the field, but at the same time his frustration and his hopelessness as he's going through the motions. That's not to say he's no longer a behavioral scientist. He still is. He also works in the financial services, but he actually used to work for Ogilvy Change, so the really famous advertising and the marketing behavioral science team at Ogilvy under Rory Sutherland. So I
Yeah.
think he will give you some very interesting perspectives on what his current perception is of the field.
I love it. All right. I will, look, for those that don't know, go YouTube, search Pete Judo,
Yes.
spelled like the sport, for his
Yes.
last name, Pete and Judo.
There you go.
And I will send Pete a note and we'll see if we can get him on the show. I think that's a great suggestion. Because to your point, we somewhat over index on folks who have been in the field a little longer, have led the things, right?
Yeah.
And I think to your point, it is incredibly important for us to get a lot better at shining a light on people who have had their whole career and have had the academic opportunity to not have to fight this battle over and over and over again. We have to get out of this battle mindset. I love it. Well, thank you so much as always for talking with me and spending time. And as always, thanks so much and appreciate what you do for the field and keep publishing those interviews. I think they're amazing. And once again, folks, that's money on the mind on .org. You got to go check it out. We'll put it on the thing. All right. See you, Merle.
Thank you so much, Matt. I'll right back at you.
Bye. Yeah.